then I can say, okay, I don't need to make as much of a profit because I'm not holding it for as long and there's not as much risk and it's not as much work. So my profit doesn't have to be as much. If I'm going to be into it for at least 6 months, somewhere to a year, I want to make anywhere from like 75 to $100,000 because it's a lot of work, it's a lot of risk, and it's a lot of my time and a lot of effort. So I GC all my properties. So any property that I get, I manage the project, the renovations, the purchase, everything, acquisition, closing, renovations, closing again. Um, but I manage it A to Z and come up with the budget. And the budget's from experience of what I'm doing right now. So I look at what the costs are costing me. And that's what it's going to cost me no matter what project I do, because I tend to use the same contractors property after property. So even though I'm my own GC and I don't have a crew, all my subcontractors are contractors, subcontractors I continually use over and over. So it's kind of like, yeah, they're my crew, they're my team. So I know what the costs are based on the last project. I know what the costs are based on this project. So we have ARV price minus the 13% minus your renovation. Then I look at again what I'm going to make profit wise and then say, okay, now what can I offer on this property? And I can say, okay, so say I'm at 250 and you take off the 13%, you're going to be at like on that property, you're probably going to be around $32,000 you're taking off. So we'll just round it. So we'll say, okay, 250 minus 30,000 for the holding costs. So we're at 220, say 75,000 for innovation, we're at 150. All right. So I look at it and say, okay, I want to make 25 grand on this. I'll make 30 grand. So I'm at 120. So we're saying we're at 120. Is that my offer price? No, because I now have to say if I'm borrowing 120 plus the 75, right? Now I'm at 195. What does that cost me to borrow that money? Right. So then I have to take that number and subtract that number from say the 120. Now I come up with my offer price. And my offer price would be, say, just round numbers. We're just going to say my offer is 100. If I give a little wiggle room because I can probably get some renovation budget down. Maybe my other things are there that I can cut costs on, like maybe the closing costs are a little bit light. Um, but I also put into the renovation budget, I add the contingency factor. Um, if it's a light renovation, which is most renovations now, light is considered like 75,000. I'm going to do 10%, but that's knowing what I've seen and walked the property myself plus an inspection. So I don't just use my naked eye when I review properties. I get an inspection if I'm really going to close on it. Like if I put it under contract, I get the inspection, but I basically look at everything and say, if I got a 10% contingency, when I pull my inspection, if something shows up, that 10% contingency should cover it. If it doesn't, I got to eat it out of my profit because I made a mistake. Um, so that's one of the things that happens from time to time. If it's a higher renovation budget or say a higher property value, you're going to put a higher contingency in. So if you're hitting over six figures on a renovation, you're probably going to want to have a 15% contingency factor in there because it means there's more work and there's probably going to be more chance you're going to find something wrong that's probably more costly. I've done it. I've done projects where I've walked in and it's an empty house and I can see everything. And then I've gone into properties where I've walked in and said, there's a lot of stuff in the way. What do I do? I make sure the structure as much as possible that I can see with my eyeballs are good. And then I go from there. But a lot of times you can't see that. So that's why you got to put that contingency in. So that comes into play to get your final number for what you're going to make your offer at. If the seller isn't in a position where they have to sell because of financial distress, then you just make your offer. It's all about the numbers. It's not about emotions. So I'd make the offer at say 100 grand. That's my offer. It gives me a little cushion and I got a little wiggle room to adjust my price. So if they accept it, no, they might come back and say, how about 120? I said 120 is not good. How about 110? And if we can negotiate 110, we can close the deal. Right? Now, if they're in financial distress, maybe foreclosure, we may have to look at it and say, this has to be a short sale because of the fact of the work that it needs in order for me to make it worth the 250. is not going to be at a low enough price point for me to pay off their loan when I purchase it. So then we may have to say, okay, we got to look at this as a short sale and process it that way and see if we can process it as a short sale. It's all going to be determined upon how much the renovations are. And sometimes you can cut costs on certain things, but you can't cut costs on structure and mechanicals in a property because that becomes a problem. And you also have to understand that when you do a project as a flipper, that if something happens 7 years from now or 10 years from now, and you were the last person that renovated it, that's on you. They come after you. You could be held liable for it. So if you did $75,000 renovations on a property and 8 years from now something broke or went bad, that's a major problem, you're responsible for that. They can hold you liable. So everybody needs to be aware of that as well, because a lot of people think it's just like I renovated, I sold it, it's their problem. Um, if somebody gets injured or hurt because of something, some damage really happens, yeah, you could be held liable. And sometimes the people have a good enough attorney and they go after you, which in all likelihood they should. So I look at things and go, if I'm looking at an older house, one of the big things I look at right now, two big things, like of course you got oil tanks and you look for certain major things, but if the house is over 60 years old, you really need to look at rewiring the entire house. If I'm going to put in a budget of $75,000 into a house like that, I really have to look at rewiring the entire thing because the wiring inside the house is in a condition that the insulation is decomposed and it's not insulating the wire properly and it can arc out at any time and start a fire inside the wall. You wouldn't see it, you didn't touch it, but because you did major renovations to it, you upgraded a panel maybe. You really need to focus on that because I've seen that with a lot of houses where the wiring is at least 60 years old and people don't upgrade the wires, but a couple years later the house catches fire and burns down, you know, uh, mostly because of faulty wiring. And it's because not because anything you did, it's just because the age of the wiring. Just like plumbing. You get a house with 70-year-old plumbing inside the walls, chances are it's not PVC, it's going to be galvanized, it could be cast iron. That pipe could be cracking and leaking inside the wall. You're not touching it, so you don't see it. You're only changing the kitchen and bath. But you really need to take a look at it and say, hey, is that stack cracked? Is it leaking in the wall? Because that creates health conditions inside the home. It's leaking in the pipe with feces and urine, yeah, you can have health conditions going on besides mold and other things. So it's not to scare anybody, it's just to educate you on what to keep an eye out for and how to really look at numbers when you're flipping a property. Um, and it's tough out there. I was talking to somebody today, and again, it's where we're at with times and how things are. See, like me, I'm not generally looking and finding a property that I can get, put in 75,000, resell it. I'm looking at things where I'm going to either do new construction, add a level, or it's going to be major renovation where you're talking like 125, $150,000 rehab. And when you get into stuff that big, then you really got to look at, is it worth the 150? Should I go bigger? What should I do with that amount of money? Is it going to produce a quality property? Because everything I do is about the quality. It's not about me making money. It's about producing a quality product that when people hear me and see my product, they know they're getting quality work. And we know that because we've had people call us back 8 to 10 years later and say, no, there's nothing wrong with the house. Everything's great. I just need to find information on something that was in the house that was purchased because my kids broke it or I broke it and I'm trying to see if I can replace it or if I have to redo the whole thing. Um, so that's one of the things we do. When I do work, I look at it and say, would I put my mom and dad in there? Would I put my kids in there? Would I put any of my family or friends in that house? If the answer is no, then why would you try to do that to a complete stranger? You shouldn't. You should do it to a point where that you would put your family in there and then it's good enough for anybody else. Um, that's how I operate, and that's how I feel most people should operate. But that's how I always have done things. So I wanted to just run numbers by people with that. Let me see if I could pull up this tool that I created and I can kind of show you. Share my screen. Can everybody see my screen? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So I created this little tool for everybody. You're gonna get this for attending today. Um, it may not have all the items that I just talked about, but you can quickly use this tool to calculate what your maximum allowable offer would be on a property that needs renovations. Um, so right here, single family homes. So I just threw numbers in and said, okay, my desired profit, if I want to put in, say I want to make 50,000. You can see how it's going up. So let's do 50,000. And now my MAO is 155, right? I got a renovation budget of 50,000, but if my renovation budget goes up, now all of a sudden I'm down to 127. Um, acquisition closing costs, usually more. So that's why I said it's so you got your, if you do, let's say 300,000, and let's see, can't pull my calculator up right there. Do a quick summary of what I was saying. So we got an ARV of 300, right? And I'm gonna do that by, say, I'm just gonna say 7%. So it should be, this should equal 21,000 between your closing costs and your holding costs. 6 months on a standard flip is where I usually go. Tax and insurance, depending on the town you're in, can be higher. So if you go at a monthly rate, you're probably somewhere around, say, $1,200 or let's say 1,000, just to make it simple. A lot of hard money lenders are at 12% right now. You might be able to get 10%. It all depends on the percentage of the loan that you're getting if you're using a hard money lender. So that also impacts the budget as well and the ARV of the property. So, sometimes you could borrow money from private lenders and get a little bit less, but I always kind of give them at least what hard money is offering because, you know, they're going to look at it and say, well, I can get more interest somewhere else. So I don't step over dollars to pick up pennies, so to speak. Selling commission, I always usually put it at 5%. So right now with this property, without any assignment fee, if I was going to buy the property and pick it up for this price point, this would be the wholesale commission if I was buying it from a wholesaler already included in everything in here. It's the one piece I don't have is like a wholesale commission or an assignment fee in here. But generally, it's like if I'm just going out there and pulling off a property from a off-market seller, I don't have an acquisition cost to a wholesaler, but you can always add it in here. And depending on what they're looking for, that's what you can account for. So if I was doing, what did I say? It was 12,000 or did I say 20,000? I said 21,000. So if I'm paying 5%, then I should have 21,000 between these two numbers. So acquisition cost is going to be higher on the buy side than selling it. So your selling costs are going to be less usually than your acquisition costs. So I'm going to put in, let's say 18,000 here. All right, so see the number dropped. If your taxes and insurance are higher, say it's 1,500, now your maximum allowable offer is here. If you want to put, say, 15,000 in here, you could say 33. So if I was paying an additional 15,000 for wholesaler fee, now my MAO went to $94,000 on this deal. And I can also do this because this might not be as bad of a budget, so let me reduce that 10%. So like I was telling you, my offer is basically about $100,000 for this deal. So that's how I reverse engineer it to come up with my number and how my profit is. If I can make less on a deal and it doesn't hurt me, I'll do it. If the risks aren't that bad. What
Scott,
do
can I
you got,
jump in with a
Jose?
question? Yeah, so when I do my math, my
Mhm.
calculation to get the MOA, actually the MAO, um, I don't use a 70%. I itemize every number that I get, the renovation costs, the insurance, the tax. Itemize everything separately. And by doing that, typically I come up with a higher number than a 70% approach, which allows me to um, put in a higher offer. But what happens is that when I come across other investors that use a different calculation or a different approach than I do, like for example, the 70%, they think my asking price is too high.
Mhm.
Um, so I was just wondering. So I'm wondering, but the question is the 70% accurate as
Which,
opposed to compare itemizing everything? Because I just feel that itemizing all the numbers
so,
gives me a better number to offer or higher offer.
so what you could do is, and this is how I came up with the numbers. I
Hmm.
broke down my deals. So part of doing a flip, you have to keep track of everything. So I have a scope of work sheet that I use for all the work being done, and then I have a budget summary. And in my budget summary, I include what were the costs for title, what were the costs for insurance, what were the costs for utilities, what was everything there. And at the end of the project, I add that all up, and that's how I came up with my percentages. Because almost every project I do, the 7%, you could do 8%. Like I said, it's going to fluctuate slightly between 7 and 8% on your holding closing costs. Now, that doesn't include the realtor. That's everything outside the realtor commission, you know. And again, you could, depending on, excuse me, depending on what your prices are, you can include an oil tank sweep in there. You can include the home inspection in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
I itemize everything
Mhm.
and separately. That's what I do, and I come up.
So let me see if I just want to see if I got one on this machine that I could kind of show you. It might not be on here, but I'm going to see if I got one. And this is how I came up with the percentages. And over the years, I talked to other rehabbers that have more experience that have been doing it longer than me. And they were telling me I go higher on the percentages. And I just said, well, my numbers are this, so that's fine. And they said, yeah, whatever works for you.
Mhm.
Um, but let me see if I can find budget summary in something here. It may not be on this machine. I don't have one. Let me see. What is this? No, that's not there yet. Let me see if I got anything in there. I just want to see if I have it in here. No, just the draw schedule, which is part of what it is. Um, so what is it when you break it all down, Jose, and then you add the numbers back up, what percentage do you come up with from the ARV
Oh,
average?
that's a
Because
good
that's where my
question.
numbers come from. My numbers come from the ARV, not the purchase.
No, yeah, I start with the ARV, right? I
Right.
start with the ARV, then I deduct the repairs of the construction, I deduct the realtor commission, the insurance taxes. I include there my profit. Um, I would say like within 10% of the 70% approach, higher,
All right. So I don't even
maybe
look at the
5%.
renovations when it comes to it. My
Excuse
percentage is
me?
strictly, here's the ARV. I take 13% of the whole thing and say that's
Hmm.
my holding and closing costs. That includes the
Hmm.
realtor commission. So that's off the ARV. So if I did say just simple number, if I do a 250 ARV, right, which is what I did before, let's say a 300 ARV, and I multiply that by 13%, that gives me a $39,000 cost right off the top from the ARV that comes out of my pocket.
Hmm.
So I take the ARV minus that 39,000, and now this is what I'm left to work with. And that you could take that $39,000 now and break it down. What is the insurance? What is the
Mhm.
taxes? What is the utility say? What's permit fees? What's inspections? What's all of them fees? And you could put it in there. What's the closing cost from a title company? What are their fees? What did all of that cost you to close the deal? So that's why I do it that way because I have to pay title on the purchase and I pay title at the close sometimes. There's a small fee because you're selling it and the title has to do something for you as a seller. So you tie all that together. You can round it to 40,000, or you could say, well, I'll do 12% because that seems a bit much, but it's only $3,000 difference, you know?
Right.
So that's how I do it. And almost all the time, I cover my expenses out of my pocket. Now, at the end of the day, when I'm done and I sell it, if I have more money in my pocket, then that's a bonus for me. But if it breaks to where I'm at, then I'm like, well, my numbers are right and accurate. If I'm less, then I did something along the way where I made a mistake that was probably not accounted for. Maybe it was part past contingency, maybe a fee I missed. Um, but that comes out of my profit. I don't recharge that to somebody else. That's my
Mhm.
numbers, my mistake. But this is how I always do it. If you do 13%, if you say, here's the AFA minus 13%, minus the renovation budget, right? And then this is what I could sell it for. You want a $10,000, $15,000 commission. What can you pick it up for? And then resell it with that commission where they're going to make a profit of X amount of dollars. Part of being like a wholesaler is understanding what your buyer's looking for on a profit margin. If I'm going to buy a property that's worth 300, my profit margin is going to be less than something at 500, which is going to be less than something at a million. So as you go up, you're going to want higher profits because the risk is greater and the workload is bigger. So it's more work, more effort. Like you're not going to take a 4,000 square foot house and generally get that renovated in 6 months and sell it. You're at a
Mhm.
year process. Some people can do it faster, maybe, but you're not going to hit a 6 month mark and have that thing sold. You're in the 6 month to 12 month range from purchase to close on the sale. A regular single family flip is generally a 6 month process. I purchase it here. If it's standard reno, I should be done in 6 weeks, maybe eight. Then I put it up for market. I give it say 4 weeks tops. I usually sell mine within the first week, but depending on the market area, you get that. And then you generally get 2 to 3 months for a close on the buy from the buyer with, conventional borrowing. So that's why it's usually a 6 month process. The bigger properties take a little bit longer, so it takes a little bit farther out. That's why I was given a year on the bigger projects.
Scott, I had
What
a
do you got,
quick
Lewis?
question on, yeah, quick question on regarding finding the actual comps itself.
Hmm.
So, with the ARV, right? Let's say the exact model that you're rehabbing, you can't find an exact apples to apples model match. In that situation, do you typically like go back in a time frame of where you're looking, or do you start with expanding your search radius?
So there's a couple things I do. If I can't find if I'm capped out on an ARV on properties that match, you can expand it out a little farther, but you have to stay in the same town, right? And understand that, like in my town where I live, my value is more than the value a mile away, but maybe less than the value of a mile away in a different direction, right? So you got to understand the neighborhoods. They're called like micro neighborhoods. Then that's where you start getting into
The the
micro. Okay,
subdivision.
yeah. Um, so I don't go. I tend not to go too far out because I don't cross the neighborhood. So I say if I can't find it, I got to go with the best comp that I can find. The other theory that I can use is square foot. If I can find houses of similar square foot, what they sold for, then I could kind of say, okay, except for custom, custom strange because it's different as custom. But if I find standard homes, like say I got a ranch and I can only find a 2 story, I may have to use the 2 story square foot approach because all the ranches in the area may be like the condition that I'm buying in and they have nobody sold because it's homeowners buying it, living there. So it depends on the neighborhood, but those are the two approaches that I use. If I can't find a comp, then I have to go by what it sold at, regardless of the condition, and just say, granted, I could push it some, like so for instance, if I'm in an ARV of say 400 and I looked at the sales and I'm looking going, it's move-in ready, but the kitchen and bathrooms are outdated, right? So I know I could probably get 410 to 420 for it, but I'm not gonna say I get 450 to 500 for it because I don't know if I can touch that. If other houses in the town in another neighborhood are getting that, say, 450 range, then in my neighborhood I could push it to an in-between number because I know I have an updated kitchen and bath, but I can't justify it by saying I get another 50 to 100 grand because they did that a half a mile away because that's a totally different neighborhood, you know. Um, so I just look at it that way. Can I do it within the confines of what the ARV is of the current properties? And if so, then I use those numbers and break it down that way, or just give it a little bit more of a bump and say I could probably get another 10, maybe 15 out of it by updating it. And then it'll be the feature, and then you're good. The only problem with that is you set the market now. So if you want to go back into that same neighborhood, people are going to start selling their house at a higher price point. So it's hard to then get another property in that neighborhood because you're going to pay more now for the same property, for the same product, so it becomes a little different, but that's how I generally do it. I'm conservative because if something happens during the process and I said, oh, I can get 450 and I couldn't, I'm screwed. You know, if I'm done and I can't get past the 400 mark and I counted on that, I'm screwed. So I try and keep it in that confines and just say, what's a square foot? It's a little more research, but if I can find property, same square footage, maybe different style, then I could just say, hey, same square foot houses are selling for that price point. Mine's the same square foot and it's totally renovated. I should be able to get close, but bring it down just a notch because it's a different type of house. So if you see they're getting 450, sell yours for 430, it'll sell, because you're totally renovated and the house over there was 450, but it's a two-story. Yours is a ranch, it limits who your buyer pool is then. So if you bring the number down slightly, as long as you can do it in that range, that's another thing that you can do. I would not try
And
to push it to what another neighborhood is. Um, I'm seeing that now, and a lot of wholesalers are trying to push it what the house are selling on the other side of town, and I'm like, you're not going to get it. It's not. The proof is there. You're not going to get it. You know, don't try to force it. It's not emotions, it's numbers. And you just work it. So if you're happy with the profit, you're good. You know, if you're making, like I said, if you can get the house done and sold in 6 months and you make 25 instead of 35, you made 25 grand in 6 months. If you're okay with that, that's good, right? If you're not, then don't do the deal. Don't try to force something because that's when you make a mistake and that's when things go sideways or wrong because you're trying to force something that's not there. If the market turns while you're doing the process, right, and say the value goes down, now you're really screwed because you estimated it higher than it was, and now it's going to be less than what you could have sold it at before your comps are at. So now instead of selling at 4, you're at 375. Now what do you do? Right. So that's
right.
the reason why you got to be careful when it comes to trying to stretch the numbers and the values because if the end of the game is if you write it at 400 and it works and say you make 25, you're good. But if you wind up selling it at 425, wow, that's a home run because now it went up more than what you anticipated, right? So that's golden. But if you made it at 400, you're good. If you sell it at 410, you got that little bonus. So I always keep it conservative and said, this is what I can do. Everything above that is
Right.
bonus. If my expenses, my 13% is 11%, I put more money in my pocket because I didn't have all the closing costs. So when you're borrowing money too, it's 12%. And what I do with private lenders is I give them 12% regardless if it's 6 months, 3 months, 9 months, 12 months. But with a hard money lender, you're 12%. If you do it in 6 months, you're only paying them 6%. So now you put that extra 6% in your pocket, but you have to account for that whole year process. So see, there's some little things that fall into play, these little nuances that are like, oh, I had it accounted for. Where did that money come from? Oh, that's right. I didn't pay the hard money lender the extra 6% because I got done quicker, but I allocated the 12% for it. So
And
that's
then
why I
Scott,
always do conservative underwriting.
what do you usually do in terms of like time frame? How back in time do you go to check your comps?
I don't go any more than a year. I like to do six
Oh,
months,
you
but
go
I'll
up to
go
a
back
year?
a year if there's not a lot of sales in that market area.
Gotcha.
Um, and I don't go that far back because if I go and take 6 months now farther out and I'm looking at something a year and a half ago, you're looking at a 2 year mark backwards by the time you're ready to sell. That's too far back. There's too much of a swing in the market. Now you could be up, but you could always hit a down cycle in the process. That's what I'm saying. If you go too far back, you're there. And a lot of times too, I'll look at a comp and say, oh, that was 11 months ago. I won't use it because by the time I'm done, that doesn't count anymore. If I'm 9 months, I could say, all right, I can kind of use it so long as it's in the same value as the other properties. I don't try and say, oh, that was 800 and I'm getting 750 on the others. I want to use it because it's 800. I just look and say, is the value the same as the others? And it also shows me in the neighborhood how often does the value in that neighborhood, what's going on in that neighborhood? Are values changing up or down, or are they kind of stagnant and consistent over a long period of time? Some places are like that. Like back in '08, there were some towns that never lost their value. They dipped slightly, and others drastically went down. Some actually went up a little. So that's why you could look back 2 years just to see the pattern of the area and see, has it been consistently just that same level of value? Did it go up because everybody went up because of COVID? You know, like right now, markets are starting to turn a little bit and come down. People are saying they're going to go up, and I'm like, I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing longer days on market. I'm seeing price drops. Um, you know, and certain towns again, depending on the market you're in, you may not see that. So that's why you have to know your markets. You have to really understand the market that you're in. Some people just like to be in. I know people that just they only work in specific markets because they understand the market, they understand the values, they know it. If the market drops, it may drop a small percentage for them, so they're not really going to lose money. But you can go into another town and look at it, and all of a sudden it dropped 20%. You know, so you really got to understand your markets. Um, you can't. I always found that you can't understand the markets across the whole state and know them. You know, uh, pre-COVID, I used to know Middlesex, Monmouth, and Mercer counties pretty well. Like I could tell you what neighborhood, type of house, I knew what it would go for, fixed up. So I already knew going to the property what I'm gonna sell it at. Now, because of everything with the fluctuations of COVID, it got crazy numbers, interest rates. Um, one house in the same neighborhood sold 50,000 less than the other just because they want to sell it. So they didn't care. And that impacts your value because that same house fixed up sold 50,000 less than that house. So now you're like, what do I do? So always write conservative. Don't look for the biggest exit. Write conservative and say, does it make sense for me to do this at my price point? Anything above your price point when you sell is a bonus for you. But if you sell it at your price point, you're good because the numbers worked and they fit in the confines of what you were doing. So any other questions? Okay.
Well,
So
I have a question for you.
sure.
When it comes to the calculation of numbers and coming to an offer, one of the items that I need to get up to speed with is insurance, right? Insurance for fix and flip, insurance for a vacant property. So let's say for colonial, that's 1,800 square foot compared to a Cape of 1,300 square foot. What would the insurance cost would be for those type of projects?
Um, they basically look at the square footage of the house and the value of it and what the cost to build is. So if you're renovating a house like I'm doing right now, I'm in the process of doing an add a level, right? So I have to have it covered by a certain amount to pay to cover the cost of the lender. And right now the budget is $200,000. So I have to make sure that I could build that house for $200,000 if it burned to the ground, if a storm came and knocked it down, if there was vandalism. Um, is the house worth that in the area? See, that's the other thing. That's where all these numbers come into play. You have to know what the ARV is. Because when you go to insure it, you can't insure it for more than what it's going to be worth. The insurance company won't do that. So when you're doing renovations, you're not necessarily going to you're not going to pick up the insurance at what the ARV is from the start. You're going to pick up what the renovation is, what the value is as is, and maybe a little bit higher to cover things if you had to rebuild it from the ground up. You'd be able to cover the cost of a whole rebuild. So that's part of what the insurance does. What is the cost to rebuild this home per square foot? So you need to know what the cost to rebuild is per square foot. I think right now, because where we're at, we're covering a 1,500 square foot house that we're covering it for $355,000. ARV is 600. We have an appraisal that's higher. See, this is what I mean where I'm conservative. The appraisal came in at a lot higher amount than what I'm valuing it at. If I hit my marks, I'm great. Anything higher is a bonus. Um, so right now we're insuring it for 355 because we got to cover the lender. We know we're all in on basically rebuilding it at 250, 300. So we're good. We can cover the cost to rebuild, we cover the lender's money, everything is covered. As we go along, as the value of the property increases, we're going to have to increase the amount of insurance because now the value's higher. So we want to make sure that it covers the cost of the house. Even though the build may be less than what the value is, we want to make sure we cover what the value is. So as we put more into it, we have to make sure we cover the costs. So when you start out, you're going to be lower, and by the time you're done renovating, you may have to increase the insurance because now it's more valuable. Now it's going to cost more to build because you got to put what was in there back in. So when I'm starting, I may be starting at say 125 a square foot, but now when I'm done, I might be at $150 a square foot. So now I got to make sure my insurance covers that $150 a square foot at the end because I can't put in the material as it was at 125,000 a square foot or $125 a square foot. I have to put it in as what it would cost me at 150 because I got to put that same finished product back in place.
Do you increase the insurance based on the phase of construction completion?
Right. Like right now, we're just a shell. Once I get like HVAC in, plumbing in, windows, doors on, siding on, I have to look at it and say, where am I at value wise? Do I need to increase it yet or wait till I'm done with almost full renovations? Because once I'm done with rough, that you're basically 4 to 6 weeks out from being done, you know. That's where you put in your flooring, your sheetrock, all your cabinets, your trim, your doors,
Mhm.
all of that goes into place at that point. Now, because you put that in, I'm putting in a kitchen that costs X amount of dollars. That raises the value of the house. So I got to make sure I can cover my cost to rebuild with all that stuff in place. Right now, I don't have to because it's a stick, right? So to get it to the point where I'm at, it's only going to cost me X amount of dollars. But once I finish it off, it's going to be up here. So that means I got to cover the price point up here because I got to build it with the sticks and all the finishings. So that's why I'll increase my costs in like another month, maybe a little bit longer,
Mhm.
um, so that I can cover the cost of a complete rebuild. And that's what it is when you're doing a renovation project, not what I'm doing, but a standard flip, say, which should take you 6 to 8 weeks tops. Um, Chances are you're going to want to make sure you cover the ARV cost because you're not going to take 6 months to do an add level and put higher finishings in. You're going to be doing that right from day one. Got the kitchen, got the bathroom, got the floors. Now start putting it back together. Um, so that's what it is. But you also got to shop around. Don't just go to one place, say, what do you got? Give me it. You know, we just had to do that. And we always go when we're doing renovation projects because it's vacant. So that's the big thing. Usually when you're doing these properties, they're vacant properties. So insurance companies charge more for a vacant property. So the insurance is higher. So we always go through NREIG, the National Real Estate Insurance Group, because they do vacant homes. They don't do new construction, but they do add levels, renovations, things like that, and they cover vacancy. A lot of insurance companies will cover it, but they're a lot more money. So I think like we were at say $2,000 for a year, and the other insurance companies were at like 1,500 for 6 months, right? So that's a big hit. If I'm paying 2,000 or 3,000, that's $1,000 that comes out of my pocket if I'm going with the other guy. So I always go to where they're going to cover what I need, and I'm good, and go with what works for my budget because that goes into my 12, 13%. So see, right there's a number. If I go with a guy that's $1,000 lower, I may reduce my 12, 13%. But if I'm going with the guy that's higher, my 12, 13% may sit there closer to the 13% range, you know? So
Yeah,
these
got
are
it.
all little
Thank you.
things that you have to do. Everything is like build a team, have the team on board with you and rinse and repeat because with an insurance broker, it's the same thing. Hey, Jose, how you doing? Oh, you got another project? Great. What do you got? Great. Okay, here's the insurance. They have back to you in 24 hours. Other places are like, well, we got to underwrite it. We got to do this. We got to do that. They don't work with you that often. They're not that way. But an insurance broker is a team member. A title company is your team member. You know, um, All these different people are your team members, and always shop around because you want to make sure you're getting the best rate for yourself, best coverage at the best price. Somebody may be like, oh, they're cheaper. Are they covering you the same way as that other person? That's what you want to make sure of too. Don't just look at a dollar sign and say, oh, that's cheaper. I'm going that route, because something may happen. You'll be like, what do you mean you don't cover that? My other insurance company did. Well, that's why they were higher, because they're covering that. you know.
Yeah, Scott, I had another quick question.
Sure.
So how do you determine things like if you're gonna take on a project as an add a level or just, add a value project? What are the indicators that you see that are like, oh, I could, add value or add an addition to this property? Like
So
how do you
yeah,
go about
so
that process?
look at the neighborhood, right? And sometimes just doing a renovation doesn't work for that property. But if I put a second floor on it, is that what's in the neighborhood? Like, I don't want to be the oddball guy, so I'm not necessarily going to be the first guy to put the second floor on in the neighborhood, right? But if I see other homes on the block that already have a second floor, does it make sense for me to put that second floor on? What would be the ARV with the second floor and additional space added compared to staying at the single floor? Yes, it takes longer, but I could always create more equity out of it and forced appreciation, which gives me a better return. And I'm also putting a product out there and I'm able to pay more as well sometimes for the product, the initial purchase, because I'm putting the at a level on, and that's my exit strategy where everybody's just trying to flip it. So you got all the people trying to compete for the same house. So, everybody's gonna bid a bid a bid a bid, and it's just a flip. But if you say, well, what if I put a second floor on that? It's gonna cost me X amount of dollars, $150 a square foot to put a second floor on that. And if I'm adding 1,000 square feet, that's, $150,000, right? Give it a little more, say 175,000, added to what I'm buying it at, say 400. So I'm all in at 475 plus closing costs. I might be in at 625. If I could sell that at eight to 850, that's a nice deal, right? If I can only sell it at 7, I ain't touching that. You see what I'm saying? But if I get the flip at, say, the 400, and I got to put 75 in, and it's only worth 550, that's not worth me either. That's too risky. I'm like, I'm not going to make the money there. So sometimes by putting a second floor on, that deal changes the value and it makes sense to do. Especially if it's in a desirable market where everybody's blowing it up. Like if you go to North Edison, everybody's blowing up the homes. They're buying 2,000 square foot ranches for over $1 million, knocking them down and building a 4,000 square foot home that's worth 2.2 million.
Yep,
But
and
it
that's a
costs $1 million
fact.
to build it. So, right? Jose seen that, right?
Yeah, I seen it. Oh,
It's
you
nuts,
drive like
but
every,
the
hmm
people aren't flippers. They're not the most of them aren't developers. They're people that are like, I want to live here. I'm buying this house. I don't care what it costs me. So they go buy, me. Does it make sense for me to do that? I'd probably have to pay less than $1 million to do it, and then it would make sense. But you could see the neighborhood is expanding. So if you could pick up a property in that neighborhood, knock it down, expand on it, and resell it for the price point that they're getting in that area, then sure, why not do that? It takes a little bit more time and money, but you know, you could do it, definitely do it and make profit on it. I wouldn't do it as a first flip because it takes a little bit of experience to do that. But if you're working with somebody that is a contractor or has experience doing it, then yeah, by all means, it's a good strategy and eliminates a lot of competition.
And Scott, in your contracts, are you putting like a contingency that dependent on like permits being approved from the town if you're planning to add a level or anything like that?
If no, if I'm in a neighborhood where I see it, then I'm not going to worry about it because they can't really deny it because other people are already doing it. So it's just a matter of
Okay,
going through the
gotcha.
process and steps of getting it done. So the fact that that's all going to be determined on how fast you can get your architect on board and he does a great design and you get it to the town um, for the approval from zoning and planning. But usually you have to have all the designs in place and then you get all your mechanics behind you, your services lined up, and you submit it all, and then you wait for the town to go yes or no. But when you see two-story homes in the same neighborhood, they can't tell you no if other people already have them there. It's just a matter of what do you need to do to be able to do it. They most of the time aren't going to care because it increases the tax revenue that they get because you increase the value, which creates more taxes for the town for the same property. And a lot of times, if you keep it in the same footprint, meaning don't expand it widthwise or lengthwise, just go straight up, it makes it easier because you're within the same footprint of the original house. The only thing you got to worry about is the height. Oh, what's the height limits? You know, are you past that height limit? Then you got to go for a variance. If you're within the height limit, there's no variance. They just look at it and say, okay, you're within the height, everything's good. Yep, no problem. You know, so that's all determined on what you're going to do. But you know, it's usually not an issue. If you're the oddball and you're the first guy doing it, then yeah, you have to look at that. Expect time constraints and time kickouts because they're going to be like, "What are you doing? Where are you?" You know, you also have to look at if you're trying to do that in an area that has been done. Um, you know, what's the setbacks on the property?
Mm.
You know, so if you got a little cape and you want to make a 4,000 square foot home, can you fit it on that property? You know, and besides that, will they allow that size square foot to be built on that property? Lord, that is an example where they're putting anything on any property. They don't care. They're putting a 4,000 square foot house on a 10,000 square foot lot. So you could build a 2,000 square foot house, a 4,000 square foot house. It doesn't matter there, but other towns will limit you and say that lot size only allows you to build a 2,500 square foot house max. So now you got to look at it and say, if I can only build a 2,500 square foot house, does that make sense for me to do? Financially, would it make sense? What's the numbers look like for that? Because I got to buy the house, um, then I got to expand it. What's it going to cost to expand it? Will I be able to sell it and get my money back? You know, and then
Mm.
what I also like to do too, over like when you're doing that, is sometimes people buy a lot and they forget there's the cost to bring in services. You got to bring in sewer, water, gas. Gas is usually free, but sewer and water now you have to tap into the city. What's that cost added on to the new construction build? So if you could find a house that you can knock down, you already have the services on the property. You don't have to open up the street. You don't have to get all of that extra cost. It's there. They just cap it all off, knock the house down, and build it from scratch. And we've already done that too. Um, so there's a lot of different things to look at when you're doing different types of work. But if you're just doing a standard flip, then you just go in and do the renovation, comp it by what's in the market. Don't go past it, trying to make it worth more than what it is unless you can prove the values there and see the value there. And don't go too far back in time because it's not going to make sense. If you go to a buyer, so that's the other thing, you go to a lender, that person buying its lender is going to look at the comps too. They only go so far back as well, even with appraisers. Appraisals are like realtors, so they kind of do the same thing, but they're just, you know, I just always look at comps from what properties have sold recently in the past 6 months. And if there's not too many, I say, okay, I'll kick it back 9 months. I don't like going back a year because I'm going to be past that year mark by the time I'm done renovating. That's why I don't like using them. All right, let's see. So in my, so now the other thing to look at too is when you're doing a rental property. So you could do 2 to 4 unit or any kind of residential property and understand the finishings that you're doing. So that makes a determination on the value as well. You in certain markets, you're not going to put like I don't do Section 8. So I do working class people. So I'm not going to put quartz in. I'm not going to put high end stuff into the properties. I'm just going to put your average, you know, granite countertop max. You know, we'll put waterproof vinyl floors in. Um, Stainless steel appliances or black, depending on the environment where your property's at, the market. So some markets, depending on where the property's at, the age of the building, you're not going to put in top of the line stainless steel, but you can put in low end stainless steel. You can put in black appliances. I don't necessarily like white because they get dirty quick, so they don't hide the dirt or the stains as well. Um, but take that into consideration now. Most lenders only lend on a certain percent of the ARV when you're doing a renovation and a project when you're going to do a burr strategy. So you got to do the same thing. You got to break it down from the ARV level, come backwards, and say, okay, they're only going to lend on a certain percentage from the start. So like you'll get some lenders, they'll say, I'm lending 90% on the purchase and 100% of the renovation up to 80% of the ARV. So is anybody confused by that? Does anybody need clarification on that, what that means? Because what that means is that if your say your ARV is 400, they're only gonna lend the max up to 80%, right? But when you refi, it's another story too. Sometimes they'll only do 75% of the ARV on the refi. They're not gonna give you 100% of the ARV on a burr. A lot of times you're gonna get 70 on a commercial property. Residential, you'll get some people that'll do 75, maybe push 80, but you limit your lenders when you start going that high. And then you just get yourself into a box of, I can only get this done if I use that specific lender with his terms. And then that lender knows it, and then they got you by the tail because they're like, go ahead. Now you're stuck doing this project through me because of the percentages, and they can turn around and tell you at the end, you got to come to the table with money when you go to refi it because they're only going to lend you 75% now, not 80%. So when I underwrite rental properties, I always do the 70% ARV rule on the refi side. And that's where I go to. So if I'm $1 million property, I can only get 700,000 on a refi to hold it at the end and keep it. If my numbers don't work to that point, doesn't work for a flip. Because I can flip a 4-unit building. I can flip an 8-unit building. I don't like to. I look at my commercial side as holds, long-term holds. But if I'm doing a 2 to 4 unit, like, I run it at a 70% number. So if I go to refi it, I'm 70% all in. If it works, I'm good. Then I'll do this deal. If I'm at 68%, I'll still look at it and determine if I want to do it because I can probably cut some expenses out to get it to that percentage. Like if I'm at 72%, I can cut some stuff back to get it to that 70% mark. So that's where I always round it. That's where I always start my numbers. Do the 70% ARV when you're trying to burn. If it comes in at 80, you're selling it. Unless you get to the end, you can recheck the numbers then, have the lending parameters changed and guidelines changed. Does it now fit into what the lenders are willing to do? You might be able to do it. But going at that point saying, I'm going to sell this and I'm going to make a nice profit, And then the other strategy is when it comes to it, are you going to house hack it? Meaning live in one unit and rent out the other 3, because then that changes your exit and who you're going to borrow money from on the refi side. Because hard money lenders don't lend to tenant lived in properties. So you have to go to different funders to get that type of property. To get that type of loan for a strategy that you're going to do house hack with. But it's similar backwards reverse engineering. ARV 70% mark. Does everything fit within there? How do I know if it fits? Let's break everything down. I want to be 70% in at the end so I know I can refi this. If I'm past that point, I have to sell. If I'm close to it, I can look at it when I'm done. Mindset is I'm selling, but I may be able to refi it and keep it later on. And understand that it's a rental property, so you're not going to put the same finishes you would in on a flip. Because it's all rental, and even if you sold it, a landlord's buying it. Now if you're in a higher price point area, like say Ironbound section of Newark, you're probably going to put in a higher finishes because that's what it requires. So you need to understand that, and that still falls in that 70% rule of your refi budget. So long as it works from that 70%, you work your way backwards as if you were buying it to do a renovation project to flip. Start from that 70%, work back. If it all fits, you can refinance it and keep it. If not, you're selling it. And let me do that as well here. I'm going to share my screen again. Because my tool, you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I click the next tab and guess what? I'm now in a 2 to 4 unit valuation process of what my MAO can be. And it's the same process, but it's different because you're looking at this to not sell, but you're looking at, you could sell it or you could do a burr. So you got both numbers in here. So like, say you're at 800,
Where do you see the two numbers? Okay, I see the burr. All right, I
Here's the
see.
flip
Okay.
and here's the
Yep,
burr.
I see it. Yes.
So that's your MAO for for a flip because you're selling it, you're not keeping it. But if I was going to refinance it, I have to be all in at this. This is what I could offer on it because I'm only putting a renovation budget in of this, contingency of 10, total units in the property for cap rate. Cap rate's dependent on what sales are and the NOIs. Um, so these are all adjustable. You just have to figure out, like, see, projected hold time 6 months because it's 4 units, 2 months a unit. Tax and insurance, this is probably going to be a little higher in this situation. You're probably going to be at like, I'm going to put 4,000 in here. Oh, wait, this is monthly. I'm thinking annual. Say 2,000. Bridge component interest, 12%. And see, it's at 75%, right? So I could say, okay, let's back it down to 70%. And now it just dropped. So it went from 556 down to 509. You almost lost 50,000 in value there for your offer because of the fact of the LTV is now lower. So that's why if I underwrite it and say most of my lenders are going to do a 70% target, this is what I can pay for it. And then of course, if we change numbers, so say this is probably going to be 40,000, right? So if I put 40 in there, closing costs, if selling, that's 5%. Let's see, say the cap rate's a little bit lower because we're in a better market. Do 5.5. Now, always a minimum 10% contingency. Renovation budget's not high. What if I have to put 150 in? See? Then I would probably put 15% here. You know, what if it's 3 units? What if I want
Scott,
300 per door?
Scott,
Yes.
back to your contingency.
Yep.
If it's a new investor or a new fix and flip, they're doing a first project, do you recommend putting in a higher contingency, like 20%?
No, I wouldn't do 20%. If you're going to put in a contingency of 20%, then you just need to increase your renovation budget. So
Mhm.
the contingency is what is called the fudge factor, the uh-oh factor, um, sight unseen things. That's why I've been doing this a long time. I always get a home inspection. I mean, the
Yeah,
last project
and
I'm
that's
doing, I didn't, but I always
and
get a
that's
home
my
inspection.
point. Yes, Scott, that's my point for like a new investor, a new fix and flipper who's doing a first project.
Right.
You think it's
So if you're
wise to increase
doing,
that?
again, if I'm doing a 75,000 renovation, I would
Mhm.
do a 10% contingency. Because what you're doing in a 75,000, which is nowadays a standard flip. That's a kitchen, that's a bed, that's your flooring, that's your doors, that's your trim, maybe windows, maybe a roof, maybe HVAC or something. So if you do 10%, that should cover any unforeseen items. Now, part of that comes from the fact of don't go in there without a home inspection. Get a home inspector in there and get one. You'll pay a little bit more, but you want them to do a thorough inspection. You want them to crawl through the crawl space, climb up through the eaves, see the roof, look at the chimney, and pay for that. I always use H&J Frio. They'll give you a novel. It costs an extra $100 more over the other guy, but he'll tell you the kitchen doorknobs on your cabinets either need to be replaced or tightened. That's how thorough he is. So I go in knowing when I get his report, I'm going to see everything. He'll
What's the name of the
find
company?
H&J Frio.
H&J Freehold?
Frio. FR. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
We've had him. He's the company that we had on the inspector panel.
Mhm.
They're one of the oldest in the state. So it's H&J Frio. They
Oh,
do
okay.
they do thorough inspections. They cost a little more, but you'll get everything. He could do pest, he could do mold and all of that stuff too, if you want him to do that. He comes in when he does a house inspection, they do a thorough. They'll poke the sill plate, they'll poke floor joists. A lot of inspectors don't do that. If they see something, they'll point it out and report it in the inspection report so that you can then say, okay, let me go and get an inspector that specializes in that. Like if there's rot in the floor joist, he might say, I don't see activity here, but there could be active pests in the house. So you might want to get a pest inspection, which then they'll come in and look for termites and carpenter ants that are active. It could be that somebody already treated it and they're no longer there, but now you got damage, right? So that's
Mhm.
where we just found a problem where I've had that happen. I didn't see it with my naked eye. I had them come in and I'm like, crap, I had to replace sill plates, some floor joists, some studs in the wall. Um, that's my fudge factor. That's my 10% contingency, right? Now, if I get that done in a timely fashion during close, you get that 10-day window to look at it and come back at them and say, whoa, I found these things. I need to reduce the purchase price to compensate for that find. So then you don't have to put that in your contingency. You decrease the price and increase your renovations. So if I find something that's going to cost me 10 grand, I go back to the seller and say, I got to reduce by 10 grand and then put that 10 grand back into my budget now. So it keeps the price the same. I just goes here and there. If they don't want
Mhm.
to do it, I can walk away or I could just say, I got to increase my budget. How's that hurt my pocket at the bottom line? So that's why I always tell people, look, you want to go through a project with an experienced investor that's willing to take the time. Besides, like most contractors aren't going to go there and walk a house with you unless they're a really good friend. But if you call a contractor and say, "Hey, I'm looking to flip properties. I'm looking for a contractor. Can you come walk this property with me?" Okay, is he making money to do that? No. You'd have to pay him to do it, and even then, he might not want to do it because he don't know if he's going to get the job. So it's better to have an experienced person walk it with you that can point things out and then get a good home inspector because you're going to go through as a person going, I can see it needs flooring, needs trim, doors, windows, carpets, it needs all of that stuff, but the naked eye is all you have. And even as experienced people, we run into problems where we didn't catch it. And we're like, damn it, I didn't see that. So that's why I use the home inspector to help me find things that I forget. And that's why it's critical to always do a home inspection. One, it's for you. Two, you got money backing you. They're they feel more comfortable because you went and got that inspection. And you're just not going by your eyes and your brain and say, hey, yeah, I know I've done this, or I'm going to do this because my GC said this and that. Because even contractors miss stuff. They just walk in, walk around, and all of a sudden, when they're ripping things apart, they didn't realize that they missed that. But they're like, hey, that's an addendum. You got to pay me. That's where that contingency comes in, you know? So I always say if you're 75 grand, it's 10%. If you're over six figures, bump it up to 15%. Because the higher the repairs are, the chances are you're going to find something that's going to be more costly. You get in that bathroom and all of a sudden you're like, oh man, that whole stack's got to be replaced. And that stack runs across the basement now. That's going to cost you $2,500 just to do that, just to run the pipe across the basement and redo the stack up to the toilet on the ranch. You know, that could wipe out your whole contingency if that's all you accounted for was like 10% of a 25,000 rehab, right? So if you find a couple hits like that, oh, I got to do all your plumbing, which you didn't account for all your drain work. That's going to be a $5,000 to $10,000 hit on a 10% contingency. You may not cover it, of course, with other things. So that's why I'm always say 75. It doesn't matter because if you don't use it, you didn't spend it. It puts more money in your pocket because you accounted for it. That's why it's better to be conservative and just say, okay, it's going to cost me X amount of dollars. I'm only making 25 grand profit, but I didn't use that contingency. So then I put that in my pocket. So now my profit's 30 grand or 35 grand. That's how you can adjust that number. So long as you're happy with your bottom line walk away number from your conservative underwriting, you're good because anything above that's bonus. And, you know, when you rinse and repeat what you're doing, you'll wind up becoming better at your numbers and you'll make more profit. And then all your lenders are going to be like, I don't even have to not worry about you because you're doing the right thing and everything is already there and you're accounting for things, you know. That's where the contingency comes in though when you got major stuff. Because sometimes you'll be like, oh, I ripped the kitchen cabinets off the wall, and guess what? That whole wall's rotted. I gotta replace that whole wall framing. You didn't know it. An inspector wouldn't know that, but you gotta have that accounted for because now you gotta hire somebody to put the framing in and that's not within your budget because you didn't foresee that.
That happened to me, Scott.
like a French drain system in a house. Basement's getting water. You see broken pipes, you fix them all, but it's still getting water. Now you got to put a French drain system in, $7,500. I usually get them for about 5,500, but they're probably about 7,500 now. There's your 10% contingency right there. Right? Oh, there's honey.
Hi, sorry, cooking. Don't forget, not just us, but a couple other people have been gotten caught with the foundation issues because people put sheetrock in front of the concrete blocks.
Yep.
Don't forget that one. That's a $30,000 to $60,000 boo-boo.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and how do you get around that to inspect it or see it? I mean, it's
That's why you got to have a good inspector.
yeah.
If you don't have a good inspector, he's going to be like, I inspected it. You didn't tell me you wanted this. You know, that's why I always go with quality people. Quality. Think quality. Don't think cheap.
Mhm.
Think quality. Like if you're doing Section 8, then you think cheap. If you're at that price point and everything you're doing is like Salem, New Jersey, you're cheap. But if you're in central New Jersey and most of North Jersey, you can't be too cheap because that's when you get bit. You know, I think Anthony's one client got a house, foundation issue was hidden. He just looked at it with his naked eye, didn't get it inspected. They demoed it, found out there was foundation issue, $80,000. That wasn't a profit. That was a loss on that deal. And it happens. It's a learning curve. See, he had to learn the hard way, right? You know?
Oh, some of the things I just want to point out because one of the things that he could do or you can do is a lot of the sheetrock does not reach the floor. And if you look at the very bottom of it, even though we had rugs, because remember we did the townhouse that had that, you pull the rug back a little bit if there's something on the floor, and you look at the bottom of it. And if the sheetrock is messed up, you can actually see the studs behind it. And if they're metal, they're usually rusted, which is what that client
Yes.
had.
He didn't check it. That's why I always get an inspector because I'm like, I walk through it and I'm like, okay, I don't see anything. Everything looks good. Sometimes I'll remember jab a joist. If I see something, I'll start touching joists, and and then there's times where I miss it. So I get
Yeah,
that
a
little
type of
bit
dog.
done.
Can you clarify that? I didn't quite get it. What were you exactly looking for when you pull the rug?
Oh, so what she was saying was that in that property in the basement, they had finished basement, right? And if you pull
Mhm.
the carpet edge back, and you could see metal studs and they're rusted, then you got a water issue from somewhere,
Oh,
right?
yes, that's a clue.
So
The
especially in
rusty.
basements, people finish basements off and they're not, they could have been finished 30 years ago, you know. And once it's finished, you can't see behind that wall. And most of the time, so that's why I always say French drain. So you look at the bottom of the wall and see if you see any kind of mold or moisture, even in foundations where there isn't finished basements. When you see that, I call it the creosote, you see that white powder flaking on the walls. If it's
Mhm.
painted, that means there's moisture behind in the block. And chances are in older homes, the outside was never waterproofed or water management. So that means you're probably getting blocks filling up with water. And when it hits the top, it'll stop. But from the whole bottom section, you'll see that white creosote. It looks like mold, but it's not. It's just moisture on it. And that means there's water coming in from the cinder blocks. And chances are it gets water in the basement somewhere sometimes. Sometimes they don't have a sump pump, sometimes they do. But the only way to really fix it without redoing the whole foundation is you put a French drain in. And that goes the entire basement, and they drill holes every like I think it's 9 inches in the block, or every 6 inches they drill a hole in the bottom block, and you can watch it. It's pretty cool. It's not a scary thing. It's just something it's a cost. And they've come out about 2 feet, maybe 3 feet from the wall. They bust up the slab of the basement. They dig it out, and then they go around each block. And once they put gravel in the pipe, and they just start drilling, you'll see the water start flowing out of all the cinder blocks, and then it drains out, right? And then once it's drained, then they re-gravel and they re-concrete that, and now the holes are still there. So if water ever got into them, it flow out into your perforated pipe, which then goes out to your sump pump, pumps out. So now you don't have to worry about your cinder blocks filling up with water. You won't get water in your basement, and you won't get that creosote on the wall. So now you can finish it off, and you won't have that dampness. Um, but it's just something that a lot of people will miss. They'll go in the basement and be like, oh, something happened, and they'll just clean it up. And I've seen it. People finish it off, and all of a sudden it flooded, and they didn't pay attention. And it was like, yeah, they're like, how do I fix it? I'm like, French drain. They're like, you got to be kidding me. I got to fix all this, right? I said, but if it rains next week and you do it again, guess what? You're gonna have the same issue and the same result. So it's just, you know, that's why inspectors are good. If you got good inspectors, that's why if you have the right contractor, they'll point it out. As you learn more, you'll see more. That's why we haven't done it. We're probably going to do it this year coming up. Is do like not a bus tour, but a car tour. We're going to pick a specific town. We're going to find properties that need work and go around and teach people how to see a renovation project. Go in and let's estimate what the renovations really are. And it's for us, it's not just for a flip, it's for a rental property. You buy 2 to 4 unit, you buy an apartment building. You need to know what costs are, and that's why I say when you're doing a burst strategy for a rental property, the numbers are different, and it just depends on the market as to what your finishes are, but that's knowing your market area. The average rental, if you're doing say $1,000 to $1,500 a month, you could use laminate for your countertops, or you can use granite. Price points different. Of course, granite's more money, but it's also more durable. It's going to stand longer than a laminate countertop. Cheaper cabinets fall apart easier. Cheaper faucets break sooner. So understanding the finishes you're putting in and the work that you're doing could be cheap up front, but it's going to be more costly to maintain because you're constantly going there fixing. We learned that too. We put cheap stuff in and we had to go back sooner to fix stuff. So we just said, let's go with higher price point vanity faucet. And now we don't go back as frequently. Let's go with a higher price point kitchen faucet and we don't go back as frequently because the washers aren't breaking. And the thing is, they're not going to call you. We go in there, we see it, and we're like, whoa, faucet's dripping. Like, no wonder why the water bill went up. They're like, it ain't my water. They'll just let it run until you see it. If you got good tenants, they'll tell you about it, and some will even replace it. But most of the time you eat that. So, but understand that when you're underwriting 70% ARV on the refi, if it doesn't meet that criteria, then you're flipping it, and then you just work your way back as if it was a flip. And then the bonus is you just plan to be all in at 65 and refinance at 70%, because then you capture that 5% equity as a profit for doing the work in your pocket. If you get the 75%, now you got a 10% equity in your pocket. That's the cost of you renovating the property. So that's a benefit that you get as a bonus when you refi it. So that's why I always say, if you're doing the 70% mark, if you're at 65 all day long, you're refinancing and keeping it. If you're close to 70, you can look to do it. And if you get a lender that does 75%, then man, you got that extra equity in your pocket. That's your profit, as if you flipped on the refi. And now you cash flow it because you know what it is. Rents are here, you got it here, everything's better. And that goes to, my next segment, which is the commercial side of things, which may be higher up than some of the people we're looking for in here, but I know there's certain people on here that work with us on commercial space. And that's a little bit different of a beast, but it's still the same kind of theory and process. You always want to be, where'd my screen go? There it is. You always have to underwrite at the 70% mark. When you're doing a commercial property, because they usually max value is 70%. They usually don't go any higher on a refi on a commercial building than 70%. That's why here refinance target 70%. This is a little different because it's a bigger property. So this is 5 doors and up. And that's the same process I use. What is the value of this building? Now it's just different to get there because it's harder to just say your comps are going to be that. You can look for sales in the area of similar properties, doors and age, because those are things with the commercial side of things. You're not going to compare apartment building that you're buying that was built in 1980 to a building that was built in 2010. You just can't because they're two different class properties. The 2010 is considered a class A. The 1980 could be a B. When you're buying it, you're looking to buy it at a C and making it a B. But you'll never make it an A because of the age of it. It's never going to be like a brand new property. Even if you went and redid all the plumbing and electric, you can make it a B plus. You might be able to get an A minus out of it, but you're probably going to be at a B max value. But that's okay because I look at it from the standpoint of what's my cash flow? How much money am I making a month? And that's where I look at my long-term um margins here. I don't look at it to flip apartments. Some people look at it, let's syndicate and flip it. I look at it as let's buy and hold this long term. So, the same thing here, like this has real big numbers, 15 million as is value. It's saying you could pay 13 million, but let's just say let's shrink this a bit. Let's make this make a little more sense here. We're gonna buy this at 2 million. Cash on cash percent post stabilization. All right, we'll leave it there for now. Let's bump this up to 6.5%. Acquisition costs are a lot higher. You're not in like a $4,000 or $5,000 range. Commercial properties are a lot bigger. Um, again, you're focusing on it if you're selling it and you're working your way backwards. So here we're gonna have, say, let's do a $400,000 renovation. And you're definitely gonna have, I would even bump this up to 20% contingencies. I wouldn't even play games. And we're gonna say we're doing, say, 25 doors. And the average monthly rent increase, we're gonna say is $350. So now what we're looking at is we're trying to buy this at, I'd like to buy this at the 1.2, 1.3, right? And it's a value add play. So that's what this is called in commercial space. They call it a value add play because you're buying a property that needs work done to it and adding the value to make it worth more money. So in this situation, they're saying the future stabilized value is going to be $3.6 million. So if I bought it at 1.9, I'm all in at 2.5, say, with closing costs and renovation budget and the purchase price and potential cost to borrow the money. I might be in it at 2.5. So that's a nice markup. But if I get it at 1.3, that's a better markup because I'm going from a 1.2 or a 1.3 purchase to a 3.6. But understand, if it's 25 units, you should be able to do this in a year, the renovation work. And if it's more units, it's going to take you longer. So that's what you have to account for. The whole time you're holding it, you're going to be paying 12% interest on that money. Project hold time, this is going to be 12. Let's see what it does now. Yeah, see, it dropped it. Because an apartment complex at 25 doors, you're not going to bang out 25 doors unless it's 100% vacant. If it's 100% vacant, you should be paying less than 1.2 million for it. Now, as part of this, it explains it to you here, breaks down the formula and the metrics. I don't like doing syndications, which is what everybody knows of. I like doing joint venture ownership, where everybody's an owner. That brings money to the table that we're raising capital for to do the deal. Because they're only going to give you 70% of the target LTV is what they'll lend up to for purchase and renovations. Again, like a 4 unit, even on a single family, they're only going to lend up to a certain percentage. They're not going to do 100% of 100%. They'll give you 100% of purchase or renovation so long as it's a certain percentage of the ARV, the loan to value. So in commercial, they'll probably do probably similar, like 70%, but some of the lenders are only doing like 60%. So you got to be in with your purchase and your renovations at 60% of what the LTV is going to be. And anything above that, you got to bring as additional capital to the table. So you would have to account for that as what you need to bring to the table.
Hey, Scott, I have a question.
Sure.
How do you come up with the market cap rate?
The market cap rate is based on sales in the area, similar age, size, properties that are like totally renovated, kind of like a comp for a flip. Um, but they have to be the same age. Again, you can't take my property from 1980 and comp it to a 2010. It doesn't work. You've got to have
Mhm.
anywhere from 75 to 85 on a property and say, here, this is what those properties in that time frame sold for. You can do square foot approach by saying, okay, my building is so many square feet, or my units are so many square feet, so the value is this. But the other aspect is, what are the value rents that I'm bringing in? So that it's a little different with commercial because they value it on the asset itself, and they say, okay, what are rents coming in? It's based on the NOI, the condition of the property, and the vintage, and that's how they kind of come up with their value and the
Mhm.
cap rate. The cap rate's based on the sales in the area, and of course, the vintage is a play because you may have a 2010 property that sold for $6 million, so the cap rate might be a 3. Your property can't sell for that $6 million in the same market area. You're only going to sell for that 4. So now your cap rate might be a 4.5 because it's based on the income, which you're not going to get the same rentals for your 1980 as the 2010 property is getting. So your rental income is less, even though you're the same size square foot. You can't get it because the newer properties have amenities you can't offer. The everything inside is different. The age is different. So that's where cap rate comes into play a little bit. I don't care about cap rate if I'm refinancing. I can give two craps about it. I look at it from a standpoint of if my exit is to sell, then the cap rate may have a play in it. But I just look at it as what's my cash flow every month? What are my expenses and my NOI? And what's the value at the end of the day? And then the cap rate just shows up. And then, some people focus on cap rate all the time. I don't focus on it as much as what are my actual returns going to be based on all of those numbers. The cap rate falls in there, but even lenders, they don't like it. They have to use it for underwriting, you know. But it's all based on. Let me see if I have that opened, because I have another thing here. Let me open this, which you guys are going to get this too for attending. Uh, let's see if it's in here. I think it's in here, explained. Let me share my screen. There's another piece that I have that I don't see. I probably didn't have it in that folder. Um, so let's see if we can do cap rate. So calculation is your NOI and the max value. So it's your max value divided by your NOI. What did it sell for? So if the cap rate is significantly lower than the market rate, the property is overpriced. If it's higher, then it's undervalued, which is where you want to be because your cash flow is going to be better. Um, I have another doc that explains it all, breaks it down, and how to actually do the calculations, um, so that you guys can start practicing these things when you look at deals and just take the information, take the numbers, plug them in. Even if it's incorrect, just getting used to calculating the numbers based on the formulas. Let me see if I have that. Nope, that's not the spot. You'll be getting that though. as part of tonight. So the underwriting guide is just something to go by, basically verbal, explains what the definitions are, how to calculate it for a BRRRR, how to calculate it for a sale. The calculator's there for you to use to play around with for numbers. The other thing that comes with apartment complexes, and they talk about this too with single family when you're refinancing it, is the DSCR, which is the debt service coverage ratio. You know, that's how much income and debt you have. When it comes to commercial, they like it to be I always go 1.25. I don't like to be under that because I know if I'm a 1.25 or higher, it qualifies for the loan. If I'm at a 1.22, they may push back on it. 2 to 4 units, you could probably do a 1.2 or 1.1 and do it, and it won't be a problem. They don't really look at it. They look at it from a standpoint of single family, but that's easy. You know, there's one rental income, and this is what you're paying every month. When you're doing 2 to 4 units, you got 4 units providing income, but generally, water's by the landlord, and all the other utilities are by the tenants. So those utilities come off the page with that compared to a single family. When you rent a single family, you have really no expenses other than taxes and insurance. All utilities go on the tenants. When you're talking rentals in multifamily, the landlord is usually tied into the water. And then just the tenants pay for gas and electric and other things. Depending on how big the complex is, you're going to come up with other amenities like Wi-Fi that you may pay for, gyms, laundromats, things like that. All of those things come into play with your expenses and your line items with your budget and your profits. So you have to take all of that into account, but it's all the same thing. Like you have to go to that 70% ARV and work your way back and put all those expense items in your expense report and all into your income. And if you have like when you're doing commercial buildings and you're underwriting, if you have additional income, what is that additional income from? Like some people will account for late fees and certain other things as income. I don't count that. I would count other income as, oh, I get money from the laundromat. That comes in every month. I get what's called rubs in a lot of states, which is income from water and from the tenants, build backs. If you have common electric, you can kind of put that into the rubs as well. So that's additional income that goes into that category as part of your rental income when you're talking commercial properties. So that's part of your underwriting. You have a little bit deeper underwriting to do when it comes to bigger commercial properties than you would a 2 to 4 unit, because you can have anywhere from, yeah, if you got 6 doors, it's not a lot, but if you got 20 doors, that's a bit much. You go to 50 doors or even more, 100 doors is even more. I don't recommend anybody going large starting out. I recommend if you're going to do commercial, do something like 6 to 10 units because it's easier to manage and maintain, and you'll get good cash flow out of it. And to get it at a lower price point is easier than something that's large. And a lot of people with these large complexes make mistakes because if you're relying on people and you don't know how to do things, then that's when you get into a bind and you wind up in trouble.
Scott, do you manage your own property?
I manage the properties here in Jersey, yeah.
Okay.
Out of state, no. Out of state, we use property managers, but I have to manage the property manager. So that's part of your team, and you have to make sure they're on board with you and understand what you're looking to do and how you want things done. You don't let them tell you how things are done because it's your property and it's in your best interest that you control it, not them.
Mhm.
So you just have to, it doesn't mean you're a dictator. It just means have that relationship and communication so that it's like, look, this is how I want it done. If you're not going to work with me, then I'll find somebody else and that's fine.
Mhm.
Because after all, it's a business for you. And yes, it is personal for your pocket. And you want to build a relationship with somebody because your plan is to not just get one complex in that area. You want to be in a market where you can get multiple complexes and grow your doors in that area and not just have, oh, I got 100 doors over there in that state, in that town. Oh, I got 100 doors in that state, in that town. I'd rather be in a spot where I'm like, okay, I got like 250 doors across like maybe 10 units or 7 units, and now I'm in another city over here because the more doors, the better the property manager can be for you. Um, Less doors, it makes it more difficult because they don't really want to manage like smaller complexes. It's harder to find people. It's like doing Section 8. You have to self-manage Section 8. You're really not going to find property managers that manage those well. And when it comes to property managers, most of the time I underwrite it at 8% of your income. 8% of your expenses is property managers um, for the commercial properties. You can't control certain things when it comes to real estate, taxes, insurance, you really can't control those line items. Um, Water's difficult. You can reduce it, but it's hard to control when you're paying for the cost. Like now they're starting to put out lower consumption toilets, which suck. It's going to create problems. I can see it already. You can't buy anything higher than 1.2 gallon flush in like Lowe's or Home Depot right now. And it's a problem because it doesn't always flush. So you're not getting enough water behind it, even though like it'll tell you it has the pressure. It may not flush right, but the thing is it may go down the toilet, but it's not going to flow through the pipes right. So your pipes are going to back up and you're going to have to unclog them more frequently. So that's going to be an added expense for landlords because that issue. That's not the tenant's fault. That's because what they're trying to do is conserve water, but they're not doing it wisely because it takes more flushes anyway. So that's it's just not really a smart move by the industry right now. But that's where we're at with things. So that's something that has to be like I'm looking at it going, yeah, this is going to be an issue with rental properties. I got to see if I can stockpile some at least 1.6 toilets. So I got to replace them. It's lower water consumption, but it flushes better. So, but you can control things of like your management expense, services, some of your admin costs that can do to manage your properties using tools and software instead of people. Um, when you go past a certain door, like 50 doors, then you start incurring a salary instead of the property manager fee. So you get both. You have to pay a property manager a certain percent. It usually goes down a little because now you're paying their people as an employee to manage your property because usually somebody's on site. So the larger the complex, the more cost it is for that part. Then you get services, garbage, landscaping, snow removal, depending on the area you're in. Um, So those are all part of your line items and your expenses on a commercial property. 2 to 4 unit, you can generally put that on the tenants. They're responsible for garbage, they're responsible for snow removal, cleanup of the yard, landscaping. You can kind of tie them to it if you want, or you can hire one of the tenants to kind of be the property manager or the maintenance guy. Take out the garbage, clean up the property, cut the grass, give them a discount on the rent, or give them maybe a small fee every month to do that work. Bigger complexes, you can't really do that. That would be considered like a super, then you're giving them a rent, they're living there. Um, but I generally I just look at it that way. 8%, get your water bill down as much as you can. Keep the common area costs low for electric. Because as you get into commercial buildings, you have common area lighting that has to be dusk to dawn for safety reasons. And get LED lights in so you can change that all up, but that could be part of your value add play. How do we reduce costs? We change the lighting, we change the toilet usage, we change the faucets, reduce the cost, put in a rub system. So there's all different things you can do with these commercial buildings. So you just have to look at it from that perspective. You want to get your expenses should be around 50%. If you're over 50%, that's great on the buy side because that means that's value add, and that's a way you can um, improve the property. If you're below 50%, you have to question why is everything just that good? And there really is no value add to it. If you're not doing value
Scott,
add, you need deeper pockets. No.
Scott, I had a question right on the commercial topic.
Mhm.
So when you structure your partnerships, I know you mentioned before, that typically you don't do syndications, you do it in the form of a JV
Yep.
ownership structure. Could you touch a little more on that? Like, exactly like how, so you have a joint, venture as a general partner. Are they usually bringing the funds? How do you usually structure that? If they're bringing the funds, typically how much do you pay them, in returns,
So
or do you do it in the form
it's a
of
good
equity?
question. What we basically do is look at it from a kind of like a syndication perspective. My
Mhm.
team is the management team. We're not called GPs. We're just a management team. We manage the
Mhm.
infrastructure. We manage the apartment complex. Uh, we do the underwriting. We handle all the hard lifting.
Mhm.
The other people that you look at from an LP perspective become percent owners depending on how much they contribute to the purchase of the property towards the acquisition costs.
Mhm.
Um, so we'll say, so here's a scenario where you'll hear 60-40. 60% goes to the LP, 40% goes to the GP, right? So we just reverse that same terminology. 40% goes to the management and 60% goes to the other partners, right? Now,
Why do you call it management? Why don't you just say general partner?
because we're not syndicating, so there's no general partner. So we're just a
Oh, okay.
management entity
Okay.
of, so, and it's similar. So
Okay.
we'll create 123 Main Street LLC. My group has 40% ownership. We're the management entity. So we manage the LLC, we manage the property. The other people are 60% of the owner of it, and they each contribute a certain amount of what's required to acquire the property for the down payment, first draw, closing costs. And then that's backed by a bridge lender, regardless of where it comes from. And that'll determine how much money we need to raise from the people who are partners in the deal. The benefit for the people this way is with a syndication, you contribute you 60% across the people, and they're supposed to get their IRR annually broken down by quarters. Hopefully they get it. And at the end, in say 3 to 5 years, they get the big return with their equity chunk back, right? So when they get that equity chunk back in 3 to 4 years, 5 years, that equity chunk now has to either be taxes paid or 1031 exchange and put it into something else, right?
Mhm.
When you're an owner, when that happens and you refi, you still get that same percentage back, but it's now not taxable because you're an owner. So it's a loan against the property. So therefore, you don't have to pay the taxes. So that equity goes in
Mhm.
your pocket. You have your initial funds back and now the profit. That's all in your pocket. But now, as an owner, you get cash flow every month, which as an LP, you don't. You don't see that part. You don't have the
Mhm.
asset, you pay taxes, and you don't get cash flow. That's what a syndication creates. What we create is a partnership where everybody is involved with the renovation process. They don't have to do the work, but they see what's going on. They're involved with what's going on. They have a say, or will be asked questions on to contribute things. What's your opinion? We're stuck here. We need help. It Everybody has to have a skill, and we utilize that as part of the ownership. So my team manages a lot of the work, and we go out and we hire property managers and these people to do the other tasks that we don't do. Well, now when we bring in people as ownership, they have a skill set they bring that they have that we don't, that they can manage that piece of it as part of the owner. So that's where they're contributing as the owner. But we have biweekly calls set up for renovation process during the renovations. This is where we're at. This is what's going on. You get read access to the checking account, so you see money there. If it goes out, you can question right away. Hey, what happened? Yes, we as the management company can put money out to a certain amount, but anything past that amount, we then have to bring to the table during the meeting and say, hey, we need to pay for this. It's going to cost X amount of dollars. Is everybody on board? We don't just do it and tell you guys 3 months from now that we did it. So that's the difference between what we're creating because we're creating it's a joint venture partnership, but it's with people that we have relationships with that want to grow and just buy more doors and buy more doors and have the cash flow and have the cash flow. And it's based on a process that we already have with another partner in the building that we have where we went through the process, we did the value add, we refinanced, got the equity bump out, no taxes, cash flowed for 5 years on a 7 year loan. Rates went down, we refied again, got that nice big chunk of equity back. We each took a piece, left some in the account, no taxes on it. But the whole process, we're still collecting cash flow and we still collect cash flow. So we're not paying for it at this point because we refi, all our money's out and the building pays for itself. We just collect cash flow and because with commercial buildings, it's not like you can get a 30-year DSCR. It don't work that way. They give you a 5 or 7 year loan based on a 25-year or 30-year amortization rate, which is like having a mortgage for 25 years. That's how it keeps the cost down. But in 5 to 7 years, you're going to have to refi again, but it's debt. So over that course of the 5 years, the tenants are paying and paying and paying, and you're bringing down the debt. So now you can just say, okay, bump me back up to that loan, and there's that equity grab that everybody gets a piece of again, tax free, because it's a loan. It's not, oh, we sold it. It's a loan. So that's part of the difference. And depending on what people, the amount of money people contribute is dependent on the percentage that they get. And like we tell people, once we get to the refinance stage, you're infinite returns. Whereas with the syndication, once they get to the refinance stage or the sale, there's no returns. You got your money. Now you got to figure out what to do with it because you're either going to pay taxes or you got to find another deal to quickly put it in so you don't pay taxes on it. And I call that like money that you never really get to touch because you're constantly forwarding it into another deal, right? And over the past 2, 3 years, a lot of syndicators, people who were supposed to be syndicators, have failed miserably. And the people have no clue. I'm in one right now. I haven't gotten a return in 2.5 years, and I'm waiting. And I'm hoping it doesn't foreclose. We're supposedly good, but I got to wait a whole other year before they either sell or refinance, and my money isn't doing anything for me. Right? I can't see what's going on. I have no control over this. And I'm like, this is kind of BS because most of the time the GP really doesn't put up any money. And they have all the same power, and you're just waiting and hoping. And I'm like, that you're taking a risk and believing in me. So why shouldn't you get better than just the returns I say I'm going to give you if I succeed? At least with this, you can see what's going on and make a decision ahead of time. Plus, we're not going for the big 150 units. We're doing smaller units. So that's why we can renovate them and turn them in 12 months. So if you do a 25, let's say a 22 to 25 unit building, you can turn that whole thing in a year because you should be able to do 6 units every quarter and get them turned and renovated and built up. And then you can refi. So it's basically you're giving us the money, you're putting your money in for 12 to 18 months. And then you're getting it back with the interest, and then you stay on and collect cash flow. And you now have ownership in an asset. So you can go to any time you want and touch it. It's part of your portfolio and you're growing, which is what a lot of people want. People want to make money, but people want the cash flow. And it's just the industry. That's why everything is kind of upside down and sideways with commercial properties right now because of what's happened over the past couple of years of people not performing. And we just felt, me and Tabitha felt, why should we not include people in the more profitable area? Why should we just not do that? It's share the wealth, not like hoard the wealth. So that's what we look to do. And that's how our strategy is, you know. But you underwrite it regardless of how we're doing it, we're underwriting it that way. Here's where it is, 70%. We have to be able to refi it at 70%. If we come in at 80, it's a sale. But the profit has to be there because, if I'm buying a building, like I'm looking at a building right now, which Thomas can attest to that, he's seen it. $1 million purchase, $2 million renovation, and the value is supposed to be 4.3 when we're done. But I have to verify the rental income because that's only based on what the guy said you can get rents for, which I kind of feel it's just because of the people they have in there right now. I think if we turn the unit, we'll be able to get more higher paying tenants in there. And if we can do that, we can keep it. It'll be easier for us to burn it. I mean, if we sell it, we're going to make a nice profit, but I'd rather keep it because it's a lot of effort to renovate 72 units or 74 units, whatever it is. And that's a longer term play. It's going to take a few years to get through that. But our bread and butter is doing something like 20 to 25 doors. We could do that in a year. Partially, the other benefit too is the fact that if something went wrong with the GCs or the contractors, I can go there and get the work done myself until we get another contractor on board. I'm not trying to renovate 150 doors by myself. We know people where they took their whole GP team and they were rotating weeks going down and trying to renovate 50 units. not knowing how to, just trying to get it done because everything went sideways. And I'm like, it's, you know, maybe you can break even, you're not losing a deal, but that's hard to take on when you got 100 doors or 150 doors. You have to rely on other people and hope that you don't miss. So, but again, you have to know how to underwrite, and everybody looks at, I never look at the big stuff at the end. I always look at, I'm conservative. If my numbers are good conservatively and everybody looks at it and says, yeah, these numbers are solid, and we show them it's solid, and they review it and say, yeah, these numbers are solid, but you're too low on the returns. I'm like, that's great. That's bonus money for us. But if we hit the market, we hit these numbers, all the returns are there, all the profits there, we're good. Even if the market turns and I can still reach those numbers because I didn't try to push the market or the value, and I still hit those numbers, we're good because everything is where I said it was. And that's what I do. I write it conservatively, and I look at my numbers, and anything above that is bonus for everybody involved, you know, and a lot of people don't do it that way. Thomas, Mr. Flower.
Hey, look, I'll come off camera briefly. So these, what you were describing in this presentation with the numbers, that came with experience over time.
Yes.
Like you're basically presenting your hard knock in the trenches. This is your experience of managing it. I'm just listening to the numbers. I'm
Yeah.
not
Yep.
doing any deals. So a lot of it, I'm just gonna have to replay the recording.
All right.
But
Some people
everything
on
you're
the
presenting
call,
comes
yeah,
from the trenches.
yep. Some people on the call have seen us doing the work. They've seen us at the projects doing the work. And that's where we excel above other people in the industry. Yes, I could do more. I get it. But I protect my investors. I do what I got to do to get the project done. And yeah, I could do more deals, but I don't want to sacrifice quality. I don't want to sacrifice my investors' money. The risk is all on me. I got to do what I got to do. I'm not going to buy 5 properties and one starts going south. So now I can't work on 4 because I got to get this one done. And then all of a sudden, number 2 starts going south because I can't work on it and pay attention to it. And then number 3 starts going south because I'm not paying attention to it. I like to make sure one is good. Once it gets to a certain point, I could do 2, I could do 3. And it also depends on the type of project. A standard renovation isn't that hard. When you're doing like an add a level like we're doing, that takes more effort, but hey, we're there. People seen us. We excavated the foundation. We demoed the foundation. We lifted the house, hired the company, but we were there. I worked with the mason putting the foundation and the footings in and put it back together. I'm not doing the framing, but I show up, I question, I work with the architect, not just the architect, but the framer, questioning things, reviewing everything, making changes on the fly that we're all in complying with and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. And this is how we can make that change. Let's measure it out. Take a tape measure, pull it out, do it. If I didn't have that knowledge, I would just be like, can we do it? And they could say no, or they could say yeah, and they could screw it up because they're just doing it. But now we go there, we all mark it. After we mark it, we all double check it, you know, and then we go back and say, okay, great, we made that change. You know, again, it's just a difference with us. There's other people out there that could probably do it. They just don't do it anymore. And it's just something, I don't know. I always do it and I always pay attention and stay on top of things. I didn't do it on one project. Had a hiccup for a couple months with my lender, but caught up and, now I'm on track and I took control of the project from the other partner that I have. And now, the lender's been like, yeah, I have no problem. It's been good. And it's great that because I keep them up to date of what I'm doing. Like, hey, I understand we had this blip like a year ago, but this is what I've been doing. So every couple months I tell them, hey, I've done this. Hey, I've done this. Hey, I've done this. And they're like, wow, that's great. You're really taking control of this. Like you said you were going to do. And I said, yeah, I made a mistake and I relied on somebody else. My bad. Um, I can't blame anybody but myself, and I hone up to the mistake. I don't sit there and try and point fingers. Yes, it was my partner's issue, but it was my mistake for doing that. I should have never did that, and I should have kept to my guns and stick to what I do. And I listened to coaches and get in my head a little bit, and then I just said, see, this is why I don't do that. So it pulled me back in, And fortunately, it wasn't a big hiccup at the time. Um, Now it's just a nightmare on another aspect, but at least everything's good with my lender
Yes.
and the property itself and, but there's, you know, there's always that things happen. It's how you handle them, how you respond,
I
how you
appreciate
handle them, how you protect the
I
people
appre-
that put their investment in you and their confidence in you, and how you take care of those people, you know.
I do I do appreciate your forthrightness. You and Tabitha, when I crossed paths with you, you're very forthright. You live what you preach, and you have a great community that you've created. I've met other real estate groups, but what you and Tabitha have done is quite extraordinary. So I just want to leave that and have a happy Thanksgiving, whatever holiday, if you whoever celebrates what. I really appreciate you having this before the end of the year. So thank you. I'm gonna put the flower back on.
Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate that. And yeah, I just wanted to like end the year on even though we couldn't be in person like we normally are, I still want to bring quality to everybody. And I felt that right now, everybody can take the next couple months because it's the holiday season. A lot of activity kind of halts because a lot of industry people don't work the way they normally do throughout the rest of the year. So they're not going to work as quick and they're not going to be as expeditious as they should be, excuse me, when it comes to paperwork and getting things done because it's the holiday season now. So I felt it was a good time to bring this up and go over things and show people how they should be looking and underwriting deals so that they can do it next year if they see something this year. But next year you can really hit the ground running going, hey, I have, like I said, I'm going to give the little tool I created so everybody can kind of get some numbers in there and questions on it. Feel free to hit me up, reach out to me, and we can review it. I have other tools that I use to do things. Um, I have a tool I'm building right now for renovations. I kind of built it. It's not totally published yet. Um, as a working thing that I can use outside of where the model is. But once I do that, I'm going to offer it for purchase for people in New Jersey right now, real cheap. And you can walk into a project with it on your phone and just type everything in you want, and you'll know walking out how much the renovation is going to cost you. And it'll include the contingency factor in there as well, so that you can know what the offer is when you walk back out to talk to the person. That if it's an open house or the seller, you know what it is because you're going to walk in knowing what the ARV is, and you just need to know what the renovations are because you haven't seen the property. So this tool will help. Once I get it done, this tool will help people be able to do that in a matter of minutes instead of trying to write everything down and then go back and recalculate everything and figure it out. And the numbers are based on what it is costing me right now to do the renovations as a rehabber. So it's not like I'm making it up. This is what it's costing me to do the work right now. So if you were to hire my contractors to do the work, this is what it would cost you to do the work. So that's why I created this tool because I know a lot of people, they often ask, like, how do you know how to calculate it? Well, it's kind of experience in doing it. I've done so many kitchens, I've done so many baths, and I do it and I paid for somebody to do it. So I know what it costs. And there are different ways where you can get estimations with it. So when you're doing renovations, um, you can do it by the square foot. So you could say, what's a 1,500 square foot house be totally renovated? And you would do it at a price point of say $60 a square foot or $30 a square foot or $80 a square foot, depending on the market. It depends on the market you're in. So there's different price points for it. Um, so that would be like, okay, if I'm doing a 1,500 square foot house at $60 a square foot, this is what it's going to cost me to totally renovate this house. That's the worst case scenario. Then you could always go in and say, okay, well, I don't need to do the roof. I don't need a furnace or a hot water heater, but I got to do the kitchen. I got 2.5 baths I got to renovate. I got to redo all the floors. I got to redo all the doors and trim. And I got to do the front door and the back door, but I don't have to do the windows. What's that going to cost? Um, so you base it on different factor. What's now you can break the kitchen down by, okay, if I was to gut the kitchen, what's it going to cost me to put it all back together where I redo the plumbing and the electrical and the flooring and the cabinets and the countertop and appliances, and I could break it all down that way, or I could just say, well, that's a $8,000 kitchen. depending on your finishes. You know, again, am I putting a laminate countertop in? Am I putting a granite countertop in? So these are all things that you have to take into account when you're calculating your rehab. And that's why I was creating this tool, because you can do a low end, a mid grade, and a high end finish, a low end, mid range luxury home. And then you can change the finishes in each one and change it all around. So there's different ways you can calculate out your rehab budget. Um, you know, for the most part, to make it simple, you could just say if I got a 2,000 square foot house that's a luxury home, I'm going to be doing like $80 a square foot, you know, to rehab the whole thing. If you're not rehabbing the whole thing, maybe cut it in half. But it all depends on what the work is. You know, again, that's why the tool is, I think, beneficial to people. And like this little tool that I created for the underwriting, you can take it, plug your numbers in, and see what it's going to give you, and change them around different scenarios. And then you can see, okay, for this one it's this, for this one it's that, because I'm in different markets. What's up, Thomas?
Just the last thing, can you see the chat? There was someone that asked if there's going to be a download of the material that you used here.
Yeah, so I'm going to send it
Is
out
the
via
things that
email.
you use. So everything you shared here, you'll be giving us the recording and whatever the software you were showing, like with slides or what have
Yep,
you. You'll.
yep. I have to.
That's
There's
the
one
only
other piece I
question I
didn't
see
get
in the
done that I
chat.
couldn't show. Um,
There is an earlier question. Did you see that about underground oil tanks? Did you
underground oil
purchase deals
tanks.
with one? Did you
Underground oil
purchase deals
tank.
with one?
Oh, that was Lewis. Yeah, underground oil tanks are. It's depends on if you want to get into it or not. They could be cheap, they could be costly. It just depends on the scenario that you're in. You know, if you have a good company that removes them and they're not going to take a soil sample and give it to the EPA, then you can keep costs down. But if you got a problem and you send it out to the EPA and you need the certifications, it can go up in price. You know, is it an oil tank that's been replaced already? Does the homeowner have insurance on it? Sometimes they have insurance on it, so you can get it done that way. Sometimes the homeowner's insurance policy has insurance on it that covers it to be pulled. I usually get rid of them unless you're in an area where there is no gas. Then the thought becomes just make it all electric. You know, oil is one, it's dirty, and two, it's more expensive than like other types of fuel. I'm not necessarily a fan of propane, but some people use that in areas. Um,
Yeah, Scott, I was more, yeah, asking in perspective of like, okay, you see a deal that comes across your table and you want to make an offer on it. There's an underground oil tank, more or less, like I guess what's your thought process
right.
of, how
What I
you're
would do
gonna
is
analyze that unknown factor.
the only thing you could really do is get it tested. Put out the money and get it tested. Otherwise, don't do the deal, because if you just buy it without getting it tested, first of all, the lender's going to require you. They're going to say
Right,
there's no underground oil tank. Did you have it tested? So you're going to have to get it tested. Once you
exactly.
get it tested, depending on the person that tests it, if they find an issue, they're going to say you need to get a soil sample and submit it to the EPA and notify the EPA, because they're really supposed to do that. They're not supposed to just say, "Oh, there's a leak. Yeah, we'll just rip it out and replace some soil and you're good." They're really supposed to notify the EPA that there's an underground oil tank leak, and EPA is supposed to come out and say, "Okay, let's get it deeper test on," which means they got to go around the whole perimeter and pull up a bunch more soil samples to see how far out it went. Is it strictly under the tank? Is it farther out? So it becomes a bigger, costly expense. Again, it depends on who the oil tank testing company is and potential remover. If they're going to be honest, or if they're just going to do it kind of like a wing. Okay, yeah, it might be leaking, but it's not. They might pull up a couple samples. They won't report it to the EPA. But most once you send it out, most places have to report it if it's leaking, um,
Right.
because the soil's contaminated. You don't know how far down it goes. If there's water underneath or nearby, it contaminate the waters. It could be a big mess. And then again, there's no issues. You know, it's just at
Right.
that point you just have to say, what do we do here? If it's leaking, do we want to go after it or not? Because it could be a costly expense. I mean, I heard horror stories where it costs $150,000 because it went under the house. You have to lift the whole house up. It contaminated
Yeah,
the water system in the area, the aquifer system, because it leaked into the ground. So, you know,
right.
a lot of people tend
Yeah,
to stay away from it.
from the buyer perspective, that's kind of where I found like most of my biggest deals, where there's a underground oil tank issue, and the seller recognized it and was aware of it, and they had to sell at a heavy discounted price.
Yep.
So that's why I was just saying, from a buyer perspective, if you're aware of that situation, um I guess that's all I was asking, like, how would you like mediate that situation if
I mean,
you're
you could
already
always
aware?
tell the seller they have to do it before you buy it. If they can't financially
Right.
do it, then you ask them, okay, two questions. Do you have
Mhm.
oil tank insurance? Or
Right.
does your homeowner's insurance cover the oil tank? If they
Hmm.
say no, then it's going to be on you to get it done and reduce the cost. But the thing is, you're not going to know how deep it goes if it's leaking, and that's the unknown, you know,
Right.
um, because they could do a soil sample, but a certain soil sample is going to cost X amount of dollars. If they find it leaking, now they got to expand that. That's more dollars just to do a soil sample, right?
Mhm.
If now you already know I have to remediate that soil, so I got to bring in clean soil. I have to prove that that soil was taken out and take it to a proper disposal place. All of these are fees. So it's just how
Yep.
deep do you want to go? Is the property worth that much or not? You could walk away and go get another property. It's do you want to get into it? That's the question. Do you want to get into it? Me, sometimes I'm like, it depends on the person's situation, because we look at things and how we can help people. Um, is it something I can do to help them? How would it end? Um, is it going to be really bad? Is there something we could do? Then you start talking to people, reaching out, seeing if somebody can help, point us in the right direction. I'm not an oil tank expert. I just know what's out there and how it works to that point. But once you get contamination in the soil, it just depends on how deep and how far. And it could be very costly. It could be cheap. I've seen people say, yeah, the soil was contaminated. They pulled the tank out. It was just the soil right under it. They scooped it out for $1,500 and that was it. And I'm like, great, that's awesome. Then I heard stories, like I said, $150,000 later, and they were like, now what do we do? Because and then the thing is the more contaminated it is, the farther out it takes you to do it. Because you can't do anything
Right.
else until that oil tank is done and the soil is remediated. Until the
Yeah.
EPA gives you a green light, they're not going to let you renovate the property
Right.
because they're like, nope, there's
Done. Right. Done above the books.
That's why it's
Not
like you try and get that done
uh,
before you buy
uh,
it, and
right.
who's gonna cover the cost? If they're willing to drop the
Right.
price, can you foot the bill up front before you buy it and get it done so that when you close, you just move forward to renovation? So,
Mhm.
that's why I always ask if they got insurance because the insurance will cover it. Even if it's leaking, it should provide some sort of coverage.
Okay. Thank you, Scott.
So I think I put yep. See that, Kurt, yourcarplace.com. If everybody registered or join, make sure you have your email in there because I'm going to, like I said, that doc I showed you, I got to clean it up a little bit. I'm going to send that out. I'm going to send out that tool. And I know there was another document that I had to send out. I don't know where I put it. I downloaded it and it's somewhere. Um, but there's going to be another tool that breaks down the explanations, definitions of, and some of the calculations. It'll show you how to calculate some of the numbers so that you guys can really look at um, ways to underwrite. And then, of course, you'll have questions. So, like I said, feel free to reach out, email, text, phone. If you call, I may not answer if I don't have you on my list, but I'll get back to you when I get the voicemail. Um, Emails we'll get to eventually. We get hit with a lot of emails, but like we're here to help people, not just I don't preach on a pedestal or a soapbox. I'm just here because I know I've gone through this myself over the years of numbers, how to get the right numbers, how to calculate. Why am I not getting deals? Why are my deals all messed up? And it took a little bit of time to do it and get through it. And then over time, like I'm good at my numbers, so I don't get into trouble with deals. Um, and knowing unless I get into something new. You know, then the numbers can stray because it's like something I haven't done before. So we could be off a little bit because we haven't encountered certain things, and that's why I say the contingency is so important, because if you don't have the right contingency when you run into something in the middle of a project, and you have no choice, you have to get it done. You know, you can't just sit there and say, "Oh, forget it, I'm done," and walk away. You can't. You got to finish the project. So, like running into things when we went from 3,400 to 4,800 square feet on a house, and some things dealing with the town with some things, and how we fix issues that we didn't see when we first got into it until we're halfway through the project. Like, what do we do? Okay, we had to make less profit. You know, you do what you got to do to get the deal done. That's the bottom line with us is, we do what we got to do, communicate with everybody, disclose what we're doing, what's going on, how we're getting there, any roadblocks we're hitting, you know, so that everybody's aware and we're not hiding anything, because at the end of the day, if something's going on, it's on me. And if I didn't communicate it with people and they're just like, well, you should have told me, you didn't tell me, I'll be like, yeah, I should have, but I was trying to hide it because I didn't want people to know. Hey, this is, if you're not going to be 100% successful at this, you're going to have problems and you're going to make mistakes and you're going to fail at times. But the thing is, don't repeat your fails. Learn from them, move forward, and make new fails. Learn from other people and don't repeat their failures. you know, uh, it's easier said than done. I get a lot of times, but um, it's what you need to do. And if you find it difficult to do it by yourself, then partner with people, JV with people, you know, and this way you're not alone, you know. There's always people out there willing to work with you and help you. It's just finding the right people and asking people for help. You know, we're always asking people for help, even if it's just questions, answers to questions. But we get stuck at times and we're just like, how do we get through this? And we just start talking to people, asking questions, and we'll talk to a contractor that comes out and looks at the property and he'll be like, well, I don't do this. But if you call somebody that does this, that, or the other thing, they'll be able to find a solution for you on that. We're like, great, good. Okay. Now we have a way to get to a solution for this. So, um, but does anybody else have any questions? No? All right. Well, I wanted to before I end, I just want to say happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Thank you for coming on. I hope, okay, Tabitha just posted in the chat, Rocco Esposito Insurance. He really knows insurance, and he does. I don't know anybody that loves insurance. I mean, I don't know if he loves it, but he breathes insurance. You got insurance questions, you could talk to Rocco, that's for sure. He's an expert in insurance. And if he don't know the answer that night and it stumps him, he'll find out and call you probably by like 10 in the morning the next day, because he's going to be like, wait a minute, I didn't know that. I got to find the answer. He's really good. But yeah, I would definitely recommend him. But
I also put H&J Freely is also for you. The
yeah,
inspector.
yep. I mentioned that to people earlier too. Kevin, actually, Kevin, the story, if people don't know, Kevin Vargo was the inspector for H&J Friel for years. He now bought the company. Like last year, he closed on the purchase of it. He acquired it from the previous owners of it. He's another guy. He lives and breathes inspections. You want a helm inspector? He's your guy.
Yeah, he does. He's also certified for mold and all too, so he really does do everything.
And that's why we brought him on the panel we had this year with inspectors. When we had him as the home inspector, and we had a fire inspector, and we had a code enforcer on our panel this year. Because we feel it's important to understand when you're doing renovations why you need to build a relationship with these people. So, but yeah, thanks again for jumping on, everybody. I hope you got some good information out of this and it was quality. Again, further questions, feel free to reach out. You can find us anywhere, Facebook, Meetup. Meetup, we don't pay attention to Meetup that often, so we tend to miss messages there, but you can hit us on LinkedIn, Facebook. Like I said, if you have our number, call us. If you have the email, You can email us. There's any number of emails. There's you can do cnjreig info@gmail.com. You can email either one of us at dirproperties.com by our first name. Info@dirproperties, that gets both of us. Um, we're out there everywhere. Yep.
Hey,
Scott.
Scott. Oh,
Yep.
Hey, Scott, I just wanted to thank you and Tabitha for the two workshops that you had this year that I attended with Charles Blair and Curtis Banks. I really appreciate. I know that was new territory for both of you to do that, and I look forward to seeing what other workshops if you delve into that territory next year. So I just want to say thank you for that.
No, you're welcome. We usually don't do things like that. We normally don't bring in people who sell products lines. We only bring in quality people. And I know Curtis's meeting last month didn't go as planned, but the workshop was amazing. It was totally like it's what people missed on the Wednesday meeting. That the Saturday workshop was what we were trying to get people to attend and see. Um, and the information out of it was awesome, just amazing. And of course, Charles Blair with the AI tools and what he's teaching people. And I hope you've been watching the calls, Thomas. I know you have been on those, but the stuff that he's doing right now and some of the information that he's giving out is just incredible stuff for people to run their businesses with, not just for marketing and branding, just for even if they got to hire VAs, it's things you want your VAs to do so that you're ahead of the curve when it comes to AI technology and branding and marketing. So that's a really good stuff. But I appreciate that, and that's why we brought it out. We normally, like I said, we normally don't. I have people asking me to come out and speak, and I don't want them coming out because it's like a pitch fest, and we don't want people. We don't want products really. We want people to come out that we know can help the people in the community, and that's why we bring them. And there's a couple times where we brought some people and we thought it was going to be better or different than what they did, and then we weren't happy afterwards. So we don't like invite them back because we're like, I'm not about pitching products to people. We're about providing information. And then, hey, if you want to work with that person, that's great. Call them up, hit them up online, and then have a one-on-one sit down and talk to them. Like I will tell people this: if you're in a service-oriented business and you want to figure out how to scale or how to get your business to the next level, there's a guy named Lance Bachman that's out of Bristol, Pennsylvania, that does a workshop monthly. And he basically tells people, this is how I get businesses to the next level. And if you want to further coach with him or work with him, he has a product that you can do. But you could walk out of the workshop and be like, holy crap, that was amazing information just for that half day workshop that costs nothing by a guy that's 7, 8 figure guy, providing information for free to people. So he's a billionaire through roofing companies and things like that. Um, but that was something that we met him through the 9 figure group that Tabitha became a member of a couple years ago and went to an event, and he happened to be there on the other side of the country. And I kept his name, and then I just connected with him, and then his people said, hey, he does these workshops every month. You interested in coming out? And I said, absolutely. And I offered the people in the group that I know could work for because they have services. And, I said, what he does is great. I'm like, so that's the kind of stuff that we like to bring to people, like just information, great knowledge, um, things that you can gain from it, and then of course, build a community, people that can work together. I know there's people, I don't even know it's happening, but I've heard people say that, oh, so and so's been meeting with me and we've been having these conversations and doing this and that. And I'm like, that's what it's about. You know, you don't have to work with me and Tabitha, work with somebody else in the group, but that's why we're building this community. We want people that take action, work together, and grow together, help each other grow. You know, that's
Scott, Kurt was asking what was the name again? I don't know if you can see the chat, the name you
which one?
mentioned. You said somebody who did free workshops. Is it a
Oh,
9 figure? Lance Boxman, somebody?
oh, wait, I
Was
spelled it
that
wrong. It's Bachman. Yep. If you look him up, Um, I tell people about him because I can't do it. I don't do what he does, but I know if certain people are in the industry and are trying to do something, he does what's called M&A with businesses. But if they're not selling and you just want to get your business to the next level, he can do that. He can help you get there. Um, let me see if I can find him. I know he's in here.
I found his website. Is this guy, Scott? Lance Bachman Capital?
Let me see if that's him. It could be because he's got multiple businesses. Yep, that's him. Yep. You can go to that website, you'll find him there. Yep. And he does a monthly thing at his workshop they do a monthly workshop in Bristol. Free. You come in, you get breakfast, and they talk how they do their business, how they scale their business. Some of the stuff that's amazing is their every morning call with their sales team. That's how they start their business day. 8 o'clock in the morning, the whole sales team's on a call. What happened yesterday? Where you at? What'd you do? What's your numbers? They it's just the stuff that he does. I looked at it and said, man, I don't know business like that, but I get what he's doing and I can see how you can get to another level doing just the things that he's doing. So it's like, this is what we do, like, hey, you want to go learn from him? He'll tell you how to do it. I'd love to, I want to learn from him, but I'm not there. I don't really have a service oriented business right now that I can benefit from, but I can take pieces of it and apply it to what I'm doing to help grow the community and grow some of my own business that's different than a service oriented business because he's around service. He's a roofing company guy, but he's got 5 different companies inside of his company. One of it is a capital company, one of a roofing company. It's just incredible. He's got an IT company, and they all do the same thing. They get on a call every day, 8 o'clock. Each company, their sales call. That's the first thing they tackle. You know, I said that's great. That's what everybody should be doing, and most people don't do it. Everybody gets up, goes to work, starts business, comes back at the end of the day and says, "Oh crap, I got to do this, I got to do that. I didn't get to it," and you know, pretty cool stuff. But yeah, check him out. It's in the chat. And yeah. So, but okay.
Thank
If
you very much, Scott.
no
I
other
gotta
questions.
jump off.
Yep.
So happy
That's what I was gonna say.
happy
If no other
holidays.
questions, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Appreciate you all jumping on. Look forward to seeing everybody next year when the new year starts up. And again, look forward to getting the information from me, from us out to your email with this tool and some of the documents.
Hey, Scott, I'm gonna call you tomorrow. I need some
Sure.
guidance on you on the Edison house.
Sure.
Okay?
Absolutely.
All right, thanks.
Anytime, Jose, you know that.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
Hesitate. It doesn't matter if we're busy. We're always here to help people.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yep. Have a good night. Happy Thanksgiving. And we'll see you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.